recording started. I had a conversion of sorts happen this week, but it brought me all the way back to another conversion that happened over 40 years ago to me.
What was that?
It was as Borg was talking about the passage from Paul where he quotes a Greek philosopher, and he says, "In him we live and move and have our being." Right? That idea of panentheism, that God is in everything, and that's become an important scripture for me. But as I read it again this week, I realized it was part of a larger scripture that 40 some years ago had changed my life. And it was just as I'd gotten down to Argentina. I was in a place called San Pedro, and I was reading a talk by a man named Hugh B. Brown. If you're Mormon, you know who Hugh B. Brown is because he was a huge speaker. If you're not, you're never going to hear of him. So he talks about the beginning of that scripture. And it's the scripture where Paul goes into Athens. And he goes through the city and he sees these gods, images of gods all over the city. And then he goes up to the Areopagus, and he gathers the crowd around and says, "I see how extremely religious you are in every way. For as I went through the city and looked carefully at the objects of your worship, I found a particular altar with the inscription, 'To an unknown God.'" And then in the words of the King James Version, which I can't read this scripture without hearing that, it said, "That which you ignorantly worship, declare I unto you." And so Paul, who obviously didn't like all these things, all the different idols, was huge in being able to see that what they had was important, and that the thing that was important to him was found there somewhere, somehow. And the thing that we often do is we reject that other person, reject what they have, and just bring in our truth. And that was important to me because like I said, I just arrived in a new country, new language, new set of culture, norms, and everything. And I needed to be able to know that what they are and what they have has value beyond whatever my upbringing would have taught me. That's part of what we're going to do today, is try to figure out what allowed you to be able to have the values that you have, good and bad, by the way, all the ways that you are. What gave you those strengths of being in the midst of life? How is it that they taught you who you are today? Does that make sense? So that's what he calls conversions, the spaces where life demanded something new of you. I had all the truth in Mormonism. I knew what Mormonism was all about. This began to set me up for, is there larger truth than that which I had that which I've already grasped? And it allowed me some 10 years later to then choose to begin leaving the Mormon church and define a new course of being. So I want you to think through what your conversions are, and especially if you look through the things from last week where it talked about the different types of religion we go through, the different stages of religion. Remember that? Mm-hmm. Which of those rang true from you? Like, where did you start, and where were some of the ways you moved through those? You know what I'm talking about, where it was the conservative, the conventional, the uncertain, the formal, the progressive. Where did you kind of start where did your family of origin start you at in the religious pursuit? You know what I'm talking about? Do you want me to put up the graphic?
Well, I'm thinking we started out very much not knowing, no certainty about it, just kind of exploring the
Uh-huh.
notion of God. And then when I got converted as a teenager, after a Billy Graham crusade, then I was certain, it's like I knew everything. I had answers and there was certainty. So that kind of what came to my mind in response to your question.
Interesting. I like that actually, because that's part of why like a Billy Graham experience works, because it gives you a certainty in the midst of questions that you had before, struggles, or just maybe it's not even that you had the questions, it's that nobody had taken the time to show you that there were answers, you know? So thank
Or
you.
I probably was scared to ask anybody in my life there either.
That could well be true. Yeah.
Yeah, I like you. I went to a Billy Graham crusade, but just yesterday, a friend sent me a picture from 1969, and I was here in Arizona working with my church. It was a church mission where we were on a Navajo reservation, and so the Navajo reservation, I was teaching first grade, and this picture was me with these kids, and in the window there were these puppets, and I thought, wow, I haven't gone that far from now. I'm in Arizona. I've been teaching and I'm playing with puppets, but I had so much fun with the people that I was on this trip with, that it's what you were saying last week, Jim, about how you can still like the person even though you don't agree. I felt that again. And then my parents they didn't go to church. They were much more into science of mind and much more exploring and progressive. And I definitely went into that direction pretty quickly. I didn't stay conservative very long because I just found some pockets of, like, really? I don't quite get that.
Yeah. Well, and that's not untypical of my journey also. I would call myself conservative, but it sits in a different space than the typical conservative. Mormons are very different than. So for example, Borg talked about having to move towards science. I didn't have to do that. Like this weekend, I got my university magazine that gets sent out to me about once a month. And in it defends why you don't have to choose faith or science, that you can choose both of them. And it's talking about that. And I don't agree with all of their conclusions in here, but that was more of the background I came from. And I had to, in some ways, fight both the Christian conservative, but also the Mormon conservative that I was, and figure out how to get meaning out of both those. And so the Christian conservative, for a while, epitomed by a Baptist minister named Brother Larry, became part of my definition space that allowed me to see some of the steps forward, some of that saving moment that Judith talked about, and then allowed me to open up beyond that as well. How about the rest of you? Judy,
Well, my parents didn't go to church at all. My grandmother was in the Southern Baptist Church every time the doors were open, and my mother hated it. She rebelled against that. So neither one of my parents ever went to church.
Mm-hmm.
And the only church I ever was exposed to was when my grandmother showed me I read pamphlets about Jesus. So I just really took those to heart. But they were little stories about him welcoming children and how open he was and how loving he was. And my grandmother sent all this money to Billy Graham, and she believed all this stuff that I came out of the womb, I don't know. I think I came out of the womb just always for the underdog and I don't know. I just was never into the conservative thing at all. I just it just, my grandmother's stuff just didn't ring with me.
Yeah.
So I didn't go anywhere near it. And I didn't really go to church at all until I was in my late 50s. And I went to Calvary Chapel, to evangelical church, because I wanted to know what the Bible said. I wanted to learn what the Bible said. But I thought, okay, I'll go to church with my best friend them. But I got a whole different message from the Bible with what they were teaching. And I had to leave that whole thing because it just didn't fit at all. And so it's like and now I'm studying Buddhism and Eastern religions and doing a meditative practice and searching out spirituality, not religion.
Yeah. You know, the thing of it is, Judy, is that some of the ways we learn from different spaces, different religions, different people, is we learn in the negation. Oh, I'm not that. Right? And in some ways, that's what Brother Larry was for me. I realized pretty early on that I wasn't going to be that. But here's the thing that was important about him, and why I mention him is because he also was, in the midst of the wrong voice for me, was also the right relationship for me, in that he was loving and caring. And even though what he was trying to do was save me in a way that I didn't need to be saved, he showed me salvation, even though it was different than what he thought I was receiving. Does that make sense?
Yes. Indeed.
And our conceptions of what we're saving each other from is sometimes what gets in the way, isn't it? If I think that you're on fire and so I toss water at you, that may not be what you're struggling with. Borg talked about salvation quite a bit. Let me put this up so you can see. You know, the last part of chapter 4 was all about the different ways, what salvation means. And too often salvation only means saved from sin. And he's not trying to negate that that could be true, but he said that salvation can be transformation, liberation from bondage, return from exile, light in the darkness, sight to the blind, life to the dead, can be food and drink, or could be being saved from sin. And what's important is, as you went through your life and you became saved, even though you may not use those words, as life rescued you, lifted you, helped you, which of these conceptions became your message of what happened to you?
Say that again, please.
Let me say it to you a different way. Let me tell you part of my story. Some of you have heard this. One of my great experiences of God, one of my numinous experiences, which I love that word numinous because partially I don't know exactly what it means. But I hear the word luminous in it. I hear the word of greater than, more than what I understand. I hear a shininess to it. It's that which gives light and life and vibrancy to me, where I find energy and meaning and purpose. That's what, for me, is what we're trying to decide here. How did that vibrancy and that meaning enter my life? And so in the midst of a divorce, I fell apart. And I knew at least part of the reason was my upbringing and what its limitations and what it was able to teach me. And so I ran from all of that, right? That was part of the reason why I got a divorce, was because that relationship was a good in my life. And so I was taking all that was good out of my life. And so I ran, but didn't quite reject that God was present. Although what I'd done is place God in the stars. So one night, late at night, I'm driving up past between Sholo and Heber, right in the mountains there, middle of the night, probably 2 a.m. And I'm I stopped in the middle of the road. Like literally my car is across the yellow line and across the median. Lights still on, door flung open. I'm outside my car yelling at the stars. And my question was essentially this: do you love me? Can you love me? And the experience was that there was a presence inside of me that said, I've always been here. And so that sense of, even after running as hard as I could away from, that divine presence was still with me. And it informs all of how I approach life, because it was so profound for me. And so for me, in a very real way, salvation is this return from exile. I had exiled myself far away from, I could not be loved, but God was present for me in that exile even. And so don't be afraid to come back. So as you look at it, how is it that you have been saved as you go through your life? What is it that you were, that your experiences lifted you towards? What were your conversions? Again, I'm going to read the 8 different things here that Borg spoke about, so that you've got them in your head, Judith. He talked about salvation as transformation, or as liberation from bondage,
Yes.
return from exile, light in the darkness, sight to the blind, life to the dead, food and drink, and being saved from sin. So essentially what I'm saying is, in your lifetime, how do you define what your path, your conversion was? Which of those seem to give voice to it for you?
Salvation actually has no meaning for me. So none of them really.
Well,
None of this speaks to me at all.
I know. I don't want you to get caught on the word salvation, though. Do
But
any of
even
those other words?
transformation, I mean, none of that really seems, I mean, I look at it all and it's like, okay, I've had several transformations in my life. I feel like I've liberated myself from some thought processes that I didn't like. So there's that. I feel like I've come out of the darkness. I've definitely come out of darkness a couple of times in my life. It's like sight to the blind or life to the dead. Being saved from sin definitely has no meaning for me whatsoever.
Yeah.
So it's like, it really doesn't, I guess that whole concept doesn't speak to me a whole lot.
But even just what you're saying, I think the problem that may get in the way is we sometimes think of salvation as being a one-time experience, right? Okay, it happened to me. And the reality is that if I go through my life, there are times when not just the return from exile is my salvation story, but when one of these other ones is what helped me to know, right? What helped me to take a step, what helped me to become more. So what I told you about before, from those first few moments in Argentina, that was more a light in the darkness type of experience. And I wouldn't have ever called it salvation at that point, but it was, and especially looking back at it, it was where I began to, in the midst of this crazy new world where I was at, where I began to get a new way of looking, a new way of seeing. So that moment gave me a light to be able to shine into this new world.
What was it, a moment, or was it a slow transition into your new life in Argentina?
It was both. Partially, I remember it 40 years later, which, 40 years makes you forget a lot of stuff. Part of how I remember it is because it did make such a deep impression on me at that point, and allowed me to review the world in different ways than I had before that. But you're right, it was only the beginning of what that whole 2-year process in Argentina did to me.
But all that's very focused on religion.
Oh,
Or
it doesn't
God,
have to be. I'm
or
sorry,
God.
Judy. I don't, I'm sorry to
For you.
interrupt you, but it doesn't have to be focused on religion. Religion is just one of the ways that we often do that.
Okay. I guess I'm
Or-
confused a little bit then.
The words life to dead and food and drink made me think about how I did food and drink to make myself dead.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have life when I was overeating and drinking alcohol so that I was out of my mind. That getting those in moderation by a fellowship and a 12-step path, that gave me life.
Yeah.
Where once I was dead to life, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. So that was my association to those two facets that that he wrote about.
And Judith, that doesn't even have to have been at all a religious experience, because
Oh,
it definitely was a spiritual changing of you.
yes,
Right?
the transformation part.
Yeah. So I guess, Judy, have permission to view this however it is. Some of my conversions were absolutely not religious, but even as I was making the changes that were there, they might have had spiritual components to them.
Okay.
So if I look at my college years, one of my changes was realize I knew from the time I was in junior high that my calling was to be a teacher. Teaching doesn't pay much money. And so for part of college, I was chasing after other things. And I was a statistics major and I was good at that. But I realized that wasn't a following of calling, right? A following of what my deepest self was. And so in switching to elementary ed, when I did that, that was one of my conversions. Was it directly religious? Absolutely not. Was it even directly spiritual? No, but it had a huge impact on my spirituality because I was living out my deeper self.
You know, now as I'm retired, I feel I'm going through a transformation, and it's not as dramatic as showing up at college when I left my home in Los Angeles and went all the way up to Tacoma by myself. That was a big transformation, and I was 17. But now, you know, this transformation into retirement at 67, it's like a whole new way of being, in that what I had done for 42 years, I'm not doing. And so what is my identity exactly? And how do I fill my time in a way that's meaningful? And so it's not as immediate, a dramatic, you know, like an arrival. It's a slow arrival, I guess,
Yeah.
and trying to figure out what it's going to mean. It doesn't feel like a liberation from bondage. I really enjoyed teaching, or, you know, a return from exile, but or light into dark. It's not like that, but it is a transformation, clearly.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. These are not all of the different ways you can see that change. The important part is that something happens to you where suddenly you are, not suddenly, post that experience, you are different than what you were before that, right? And it can be, like you say, Nancy, a much more gradual space, right? It might take,
yeah,
like you said, it might take the 5 or 10 years until you reach to 67.
you know what, Judy, I think I was agreeing with. I get caught up in the word salvation. That's like a heavy word. That's
It's a
like,
heavy word.
and so is sin. You
Yeah.
know, it's like, have I committed a sin? I think, well, I don't know that I've really sinned lately. Like, what does that mean? You know, did I unpack the groceries fast enough for Mike? Or, you know, it's like, it's not like our life that we're living right now it's not like I'm robbing a bank or anything like that's like a big sin, I'm not killing anybody. So I don't know, I get tripped up on some of these words that don't seem to fit the life I'm living right now.
Can,
I
Or
have an
ever. I
I
never
have an
was
act,
like this sinful person.
have
Yeah.
an acronym for sin that lightens it up. Self-inflicted nonsense.
Oh, that's nice.
I thought you might like it. It could
Yeah, I
make you
like
might.
that's a much nicer way of putting it.
can I tell you how I view sin these days?
Okay.
Because too much of sin has been defined by people who want to say what's wrong about you. I don't think that's what Jesus was ever saying when he talked about sin. I think he was saying, here's what's normal about you, and I'm trying to lift you up to your best self.
Oh, that's good. That there's more than what you see maybe immediately.
Yeah. And think about that divine impulse in and around you. What is the basic definition of it? For me, it's that which helps me see more, be more than what I am already.
Mm,
Right. And so it lifts me beyond the normal of me, which
okay.
in one definition I would call sin. And the reason why that's important is for me at least, is because if I view it as just those bad things, then everyone else is sinful, but not really me. Even if I say I'm sinful, I know I'm not as bad as that murderer or that, that adulterer or whatever it is that we classify as the really bad sins. And in essence, we give ourselves permission to not be sinful. And I think Jesus was always trying to say, what is it that's standing in your path?
So it's kind of like you pursuing statistics when your call was to be a teacher. That was like you not being your best self.
That's exactly right. Not that statistics is a bad field. There's lots of things
Oh, no, it
statistics
isn't.
can do for
Somebody
us.
else.
But what was it that I was supposed to be?
Yeah, huh? The gym path.
That's right. What is the gym path?
I think for me, it's more about, I guess, the word I would use in my life is more growth, not
Yeah.
any, it's been a growth process. And I love learning and I love reading and I love research. And so I'm into things that are like, I'm into like learning and growing where I can. And sin, I don't even believe in sin. I mean, I just don't think it. I mean, I think there's obviously you don't kill some. I think you just don't hurt other people. Do anything to hurt other people.
Yeah.
That's to me living a decent life. That's sin puts a whole different spin on things for me.
And for
I
me
just
as well.
read a book. I just read a book called Cassandra Speaks that is absolute. She takes a look at all our stories and that throughout history, and puts a feminine slant on them. And she says, it's like we look at Adam and Eve, apple, and she's offered this apple, which is essentially knowledge. It's knowledge, and so she eats of the apple, and it's like, or gives Adam to eat from the apple, and she has brought sin to the whole planet forever and ever and ever. We're all going to suffer because of Eve.
Yeah.
And it's like Elizabeth Lesser looks at, I think that's who the author is, and she's like, she looks at it and she goes, how about if a man seeks knowledge and gets it, he's the hero. A woman seeks knowledge and gets it, and she brings sin and catastrophe to the world forever and ever and ever.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, wow. And she looks at Pandora the same way. It's like Pandora just wanted to, she wanted knowledge. So she opens the box and it's like it brings hell and all these furies out into the world. It's like, give me a break, people. It's like if that was a man, he would be up on top of Mount Olympus.
Yeah. And
sorry, I get a little bit upset about some of our stories we've been told.
Yeah. And And that's exactly what I think that Borg is trying to get us to struggle with. What are the conceptions that have only given us this large of a view of the world, and why? So at least part of the reason why what you're describing happens, Judy, is because male Christianity specifically, and male Jesus before that, defined it in certain ways. And in worst cases, defined it down to only this is true and gave it a singular answer. Okay? And our oldest traditions are always that there's more than one way to view things. Judaism has the most amazing thing that they do. Where we say there's a singular answer to each story, they give each other permission to continually write other pieces of it, not to completely write off the story, but to say what else could have happened. Okay, it's called the Midrash, if you've heard of it. It's a story like, okay, so parting of the Red Sea. Waters crash down after the Israelites have passed through, and Pharaoh and his army are destroyed, and all of Israel is celebrating, right? All of heaven is celebrating in the Midrash. And Michael, the archangel Michael, goes around and says, but where's God? Where's God? And he finally finds him crying in a corner. So what are you doing crying over here? He said, well, didn't you see how many of my children died in the crashing of the sea? How many of my Egyptian children? You see how in the midst of that celebration that we usually use that story as being, it's not the whole story. And we turn things into the whole story when they don't have to be. That's the difference of seeing something symbolically or seeing something literally.
Mhm.
And part
You
of
make me, you're about the black elk thing that I don't know if it happened this way, but I know it's true, like myth, a story about the way things were, but always are. Is that
yeah,
kind of like what you're saying the Midrash is?
yep, that's exactly it. But you've probably known somebody that was good at that, somebody who was the storyteller in your life, who allowed you to hear larger than just. For me, it was my grandfather, who used to say, if you tell a lie so big that nobody believes it, it's really not a lie anyway, right? Who is it that allowed you to see that truth is not singular, right?
All I see is Nancy's dog's ears, not the rest, just the ears. And I love that. It's like these little antennas. All I saw were the ears, not the rest of the body or anything, just the ears. And I was sitting here laughing because I'm like, all I see is the ears. It's so cute. It's like these two little tips on the bottom of your screen.
Yeah.
Sorry to break up your thoughts there, John.
No, it's all right.
But that's I'm like, I just
Funny.
had to laugh because it was so cute.
Yes, she is. Well, one thing, Jim, I was going to add to what you were saying is who has been the person to open up different ways of seeing. Is that right? Is that what you're asking?
Yep.
What I have seen is the way people live their life. There are different people that have been in my life that have done kind of the unusual. And I think there's so many ways to live a life. And I admire people that don't do the traditional, that travel or, start a degree program at 70 or, that's who, it's not like they sat down and talked to me about it. I just look at their lives as an example of variety and also lives that I don't want to do that. I don't want to live that way. And I'm lucky being the baby of the family because I have two older sisters that are 8 and 9 years older. And I was able to ask them, well, what's this going to be like? What's it like to go to college? What's it like to have a boyfriend? What's it like to be married? And that's been really an advantage of being the baby of the family. I've learned from their mistakes and also from their achievements.
Yeah. And that's, I think, what Borg is trying to get us to do. and he is saying very directly that his upbringing, some of the places where he came from, that conservative Lutheran background that he had, only had a small definition for him. And some people have held on to that, and maybe it's enough for them, but that he needed to have something more. In the article that I told you about from my university about truth and science, the author talks about doing an experiment with his students where he gives them a bag with something made out of Lego blocks inside of it. And they have to reach into the bag and without looking, try to figure out how to replicate it. And then he says that after they've kind of done their work for a while, he goes to him and says, "Do you think you can?" I said, and they usually say, yeah, with what kind of certainty? Well, probably 95 to 97% accuracy, I think. What about color? And suddenly they're going, I don't know. How do I know if it's a green block or a red block? Because all I'm doing is able to touch it. And the same thing happens if you look at an old scarred violin that you think has no value until somebody who knows how to play it picks it up. And suddenly you listen to a value that you couldn't see with your eyes. That's the type of conversion that I think he's trying to help us to see. That whatever you do know about something may not define it completely. And our conversions are sometimes telling us, have you thought about looking at it from this angle, hearing it from this direction?
You know, my Lutheran friends from Tacoma came to visit and they looked up St. Francis, and this is when David was the minister. And my friend said, well, he's not a Christian. And I said, well, yeah, he is. And in reading what David had said, I don't know what it was, that's what he came up with, that he really wasn't a Christian. I said, well, this is how I judge a person, whether they're a Christian or not, is like, what are they doing with their life? And I said, you look at what he's doing with his life and how he's helping people. To me, that's a definition of being a Christian. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of where the conversation ended. But, you know, they think I've really gone kind of overboard being at this progressive St. Francis church from, you know, their very conservative Lutheran way of doing everything.
And I understand why people get there. Brother Larry that I told you about was convinced that I needed to be saved a certain way, that there was something there that had to happen and become. And what he did helped me to be saved, but not in the way he thought, because he thought it meant this, but I was doing a whole different journey than what he saw. Was he right that I should have been saved his way? Or was I right to follow the Spirit where the Spirit was leading me? I think I'm right, that, mm-hmm. that it belongs to each individual. Now, having said that, I don't trust each individual to always make the perfect choices for themselves. Yeah. So I think it helps when we are in community with each other. Brother Larry, even in his understanding of who I was and what I was doing, helped me to be able to see and answer some questions differently than what I would have without him being there. And so even in his wrongness, if I can say it that way, he opened up insights to me. Right? Hugh B. Brown, with the way he read that scripture when I was in Argentina, didn't lead me necessarily to his answer, but he led me to insight that changed my life later on, maybe in ways that he wouldn't have liked.
Are you laughing, Judy, at my dog?
I am laughing at your dog, honey. I love your dog. I love your dog. Mine's sitting over here quietly by me, and she's staying off screen, and she's being so quiet. And I'm just like, I'm tempted to pick her up, but then I'm just enjoying.
Well, the dog is telling me it's time for dinner. So I'm gonna leave and tell Mike to give the dog her dinner so she quits bugging me. But it's like this alarm clock goes off in the dog's body at 3:30. Feed me now. So
Ginger's
I'll-
is Ginger's is between 11 and 11:30. That's when she goes nuts and wants to be fed. That's
I'll
when
be
she
right
climbs
back.
all over me.
All right, we'll see you in just a bit.
Okay. Hey, Mike.
So the
I wonder if
child,
sometimes, like,
go ahead.
my life has been so, I don't know. I just feel like I never really fit in anywhere. Like as a child, maybe it's from being my childhood being so violent and chaotic, but it's like I just knew I didn't fit there.
Yeah, yeah.
And I read books. I was in the library all the time. And it's like I read biographies, I read everything. I was reading adult books when I was 8 years old and just really absorbing everything I could through books. So to me, books saved my childhood. They let me know there was a life beyond what I was actually experiencing. So I knew if I could survive till I was 17 and could go to college, that there was a different world out there I could exist in.
Uh-huh,
So to me, books and my grandmothers saved my life
uh-huh.
because I spent each weekend with a different grandmother who lived nearby.
Yeah.
And they were the unconditional love in my life and the safe places. But books have always been, even now, it's like books, even now, I always have 2 or 3 books going. And it's like, I just can't get enough books in my world. You know, it's like I always have to be reading something, but books are what saved my life as a child. And I don't know if that's what opened up my world so much, because it's like, I just never really felt like I fit in childhood. I never felt like I really fit in too many places in this world, you know?
So what I heard, going back to how he was describing things, is that where you found sacred was was in the ongoing flow of newness and ideas and perspectives that you got in books. That's where sacred became present for you, not in whatever the mundane of the life you were in, or even the disaster of the life that you were in. That's not where sacred resided for you. It was this that lifted you beyond it somewhere.
That I knew there was something beyond what I was deeply immersed in my everyday life. That I knew that I didn't have to live in fear at some point in my life, that I could live without that, and I could live without violence. I didn't ever have to worry about anybody ever hitting me again. I didn't have to worry about so many different, my own basic survival.
Yeah.
So that, I don't know if that set up my travels in life as always being for the underdog, that maybe that's why we went into special education,
Uh-huh.
you know, and even then, my master's thesis is all about resiliency and severely maltreated children. So my whole life's work's been working with abused kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like, and before that I ran a bookstore. So
Yeah.
Books, children.
No, but
You know,
what you're
like the themes of my life.
What you're describing is absolutely the type of spiritual journey that Marcus Borg is trying to take us on. What is it that gave you what gives meaning, purpose, the firmness to the life that you have? And the hard part is kind of like with the story that Nancy told. There's going to be people that are going to say, yeah, that's not truth. No, that's not work. That's something else. But it doesn't matter, because it's not their journey, right? What gave you the strength was a very different thing than what converted me in my life. And when I say conversion, sometimes we think conversion from Mormonism to, or from what we used to be too. It's really what's turned me into who I am today. How have I found that strength, that power, that meaning that now defines the essence of Jim? And how
I think
to-
it's also important to think about what's next. It's like, okay, this is who I am now. How am I going to grow? What's ahead? You know, a new book or a new job or a new art piece. What is it that's
Yeah.
gonna? I think there's a balance between seeking stuff out and letting things seek you
Yeah.
and coming to you. And I'm still trying to figure that one out because I get impatient. You
Sure.
know, it's like, oh, come on, I want the next chapter to start, and
Sure.
to have something really specific to work on is fun for me.
But that's very American of you, Nancy. We've been taught really well how to already have the right answer and to say, I'm done, I'm finished, no more. I got my diploma, and the spiritual path is always one that is non-ending, right?
No finish line.
No finish line. And even when there is a finish line, for example, you work this number of decades in a profession, you retire, you reach the end, the finish line. And like you said, then you have to say, okay, who am I as the retired person after that? And growth goes on, but in a different way. Right?
David White, who's a poet up in Washington State, he's got ancestors in Ireland. I don't know if you've heard of him before. Anyway, he talks about the image of being on a shore, and your past is what's behind you, the land, and you're on the shore looking out on the water, and it's like, okay, what's next? What boat am I going to get on, and where am I going on the water? But I've already been on the land.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how he described his life, where he's at right now, and it seems fitting for mine as well.
Yeah, I love that. You saying that reminded me of another one of my conversion experiences. It happened when I was 11 years old. I was in 6th grade. I was in this little tiny school, 15 to 20 kids in the whole school, and K6. And we'd gone on this field trip, and Mr. Chesser parked the bus on the way home and said, go climb that hill over there, right? Nobody ever gets to the top of it. Now, I was one of the older kids, and I knew I was good at climbing. I'd always been good at climbing. You know, I have a big scar on my head from climbing a tree when I was 2 years old. So I knew I could get to the top of that hill. And I scrambled up that thing so fast, and I got to the top and said, see, I proved you wrong, Mr. Chesser. And I got to worrying when my friend also made it up that hill. And then somebody else. And then I turned around and looked and saw that on the other side of that hill, it dipped down and then went back up again. And dipped down and went back up again.
Oh.
And dipped down and went back up again. And it really wasn't the first hill that he was challenging me to get to.
Oh, okay.
It was seeing the other hills. And when he did that, I began to go, wow, there's more than the truth that I already have. And it began to put a discontent with having arrived. Mormonism is really good at saying, here's the truth and all the truth. And it began to put this discontent that said, no, there's always more truth.
When I think about that, about how little we really know is those Hubble photographs of the galaxies, and how it's only shown a certain part of the space, and that there's a whole bunch of other stuff besides that. That's like mind blowing. And then also down deep in the ocean, when you see those weird creatures that glow and everything.
Yeah.
I just don't know what is all that about.
And that's the thing, because even if we saw all the stars perfectly in the universe, from our distance, we can't look really well at one particular star and at the planets around that star, right? And we've taken generations to even begin to explore our little dot of a world, let alone be able to see that star and all the small little intricacies around that distant star. And I guess part of the conversion process is, where does it lead us to? Does it take me in a space where I go and look deeper into the ocean? Does it take me into a space where I read more books like Judy? Does it take me into a space where I redefine how it is that I'm relating to the rest of life?
Well, I think also you're looking at, like, I listen to you, Nancy, and I'm like, wow, you have such privilege. You're healthy. You have money. I have no health. My health is very compromised and I have no money. So it's like, but I can see that as limiting. I mean, it does limit my options, but it doesn't, I guess I see what's in my brain as taking me so many places that I have to, sometimes I have to look at it and go, wow, what is, it's like, I have to look at it within the realm of what my options actually are. First of all, what limits this world's putting on me, and then go from there.
Yeah.
It's like, I would love to volunteer someplace, but first of all, I don't have enough money to own a car. Second of all, I can't, it's like I tried volunteering in the office, and I had a relapse and had to quit because I was in bed for several months. So it's like, there's just, so reading it's like with my childhood, reading isn't the thing that's saving me. It's keeping my world wide open. And I can and Zoom and meeting with people and exchanging things up. Zoom has allowed me to be a much bigger part of the world than I have been in a very long time.
That's wonderful.
So are we supposed to have finished this book by now, or are there?
No. Here's the process that we have ahead of us, Judy. So we've basically gone through the first 4 chapters. And after this, for the next 7 chapters, he talks about some of his convictions, some of the places where this is what gives meaning to him in life. And he's going to describe to us why it's important to him and how he defines that. Very often in very different ways than what his conservative background had taught him, or what much of the religious world around him might be saying. Okay. Now he's not saying that in a way that says, now I have the right answer for you, which has been lacking up until I write this. That's not what he's saying. He is saying, here's why I got to this conviction for me. Is it something that helps you to define conviction for you? Right? So as you go through this, you don't have to agree with all of his conclusions. What you want to see is why he arrives where he arrives, so that you can say, which of those questions are also my questions? And does this help answer that? Or does this give you an insight in a different way? So that you can define what are your convictions, what help you to get through the challenges of life. And it doesn't have to be a conviction for all time either, right? The different conversions that I've made changed me, but also some of them just gave me a path for a while, so that then I could come to a next conviction, a next conversion that helped me to get a different conviction and move me forward. And so that's what you're going to try to find. Which of these convictions help you? How does him redefining the orthodoxy of his past allow you to be able to look at the things around you and redefine it in ways that gives more meaning to you.
So are we going to do this through Lent, or will we be done before?
We're gonna take 3 more weeks.
Oh,
Okay, so we're going to try to do 2 chapters a week. There's 7 chapters, so somewhere in there we'll try to toss in another chapter. But let me tell you what we're going to do after that.
oh, okay.
A certain woman in a pink shirt is going to help me study this book, which is called The Listening Path. And it is by Julia Cameron. Julia Cameron wrote The Artist's Way. And this is
yes.
about listening to life, listening to the environment around us and how to hear that. That'll take us through, it'll take us past Easter. So we'll do about half of it this side of Easter and half of it next side of Easter. Okay?
Thank you.
And we'll
That
look
book
at
is
that.
on my list of things to look at, so that's cool.
Good. Because at least part of convictions is being able to listen enough to let life convert you and show you something different. So that's kind of
When is
larger-
that new? When is that new book starting up, Jim? In
like
4 weeks?
the,
4 weeks?
the second week of March is kind of where it's at, like 8th,
Okay.
9th, 10th, something like that.
And how many weeks is it?
It's 6 weeks. So,
Okay.
so we'll go about 3 weeks in March, then take off the first week in April, which is Holy Week.
Okay.
And I'm busy enough that week that we'll just take that week off and then do
Yeah.
about 3 weeks afterwards.
Okay. Okay. I'll
Okay.
get started by, yeah, I'll finish that book.
All right. So just know that that's kind of the path ahead. For this book, what I want you to do is read 3 chapters, chapter 5, 6, 7. We probably won't get, like I said, we'll just have to toss in an extra chapter somewhere. Our goal will be to at least talk about 2 of the chapters a week. And the types of questions we're going to ask is, how did he get this being a conviction for him? And is it a worthwhile conviction for us? Is it a partial conviction for us? Right? Does it
Okay.
help us to give better definition than how somebody else is defining it?
Okay.
All
Well,
right.
thank you, Jim.
Thank you very much for your time. The dog is
Well-
nicely fed, Nancy. We don't have to worry anymore that you're
Yeah.
a neglectful parent. Okay, just check.
Poor
Okay.
baby. I tell you, your poor baby.
Thank you guys for being here today.
Okay. Take
Appreciate it.
care. Have a good week. Stay well.
You too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.